Hey, what is up guys, I'm Xteria, and in this video, we're gonna go over at least the patch 14.3 highlights, because if I go over everything in the current patch, it might be an hour video long, so if you want to read everything, the patch notes will be in the description down below. The main purpose of this video is to predict where everything might be at power level wise, meaning just make a small tier list of what I think everything's gonna be at. If for those of you that want to know what rank I am to make these judgments, I am currently a master player around 80 LP, which isn't too impressive, but at least it'll be decent enough to say I somewhat know what I'm talking about. Getting right into it, we see that they're going to be buffing Anima Squad, and what they're doing into it is they're kind of changing the mechanic a little bit here, where the strength of the weapon counts currently on the star level of the current board. So this means that if you have a lot of level 2s, your Anima Squad weapons are going to be super powerful. Before, the power level was based off of like how many survival units you had, which made the weapons kind of weak. So this buff is actually pretty good, but the issue is they're going to make the beginning weapons, so meaning that early game weapons like blasters, guiding hex, and bladed will be a lot weaker, and then the second ones might be a little bit weaker, like anti-mines, vortex gloves, and searing short bow. So it doesn't make vein reroll too powerful, so it's a pretty decent trade-off, but at least the last weapons will be a lot stronger. For example, Gatling bunny guns or tornadoes will be super strong later in the game, and on top of that, like I said earlier, the more star levels you have on the weapon, the more powerful it would be. So where would I place Anima Squad? We can say around maybe an S tier. I would say it probably might be like super strong, just due to because vertical traits for one is super easy to play. You can turn off your brain. It's just all luck depending if you hit or not. And in general, Leona is a really great unit, and Xayah is also a great unit. So this might be a meta where Anima Squad comes back again. And remember, this is just all prediction. We don't have stats on it yet because the patch is not out at the time of recording. I also have no idea how powerful these weapons will be. I'm just gonna assume that it's gonna be super strong. Next up, we got its amp, and apparently they're gonna do a small buff to it. And how strong it will be is having 4 amp might be super strong since they buffed it by 1 more extra charge damage. And they also buff having 3 amp, you gain more HP, but also the 4th amp also gains a lot more HP. So where would it be on the predicting tier list? I would say probably a B tier, just due because none of the units synergizes together. Because all the units you can be playing is a Nidalee, a Neferi, a Yuumi, an Annie, and a Samara. None of these units kind of synergizes together. Besides a Nidalee and Neferi, because you can play Neferi reroll with that. So potentially it could be S tier, saying that if Neferi is super strong with it, it could be really good, like later in the game. You could think of it as like Pit Fighter Vi from last set, where you 3-star everything, just fast 8, and then play all the Pit Fighters, and it makes Vi super strong. So this could be the same thing with Neferi's case, where you just 3-star everything, fast 8, throwing as much amp as you can, and she probably one-shot. But just to be on the safe side, I'll say it's B tier, because I have zero idea if it's good or not. Next up, they buffed Cypher, which I wish they didn't, and they made it to where you have more stacks around having 4 and 5 Cypher, and they also made it to where having 5 Cypher gives you more damage. Basically saying Zed will probably just delete everything. If you like playing loose streak Cypher, this will be really strong for you. And where I put that in a tier list, obviously S tier, because in general right now, Cypher is S tier currently. Since they're going to buff it next patch, it's also going to be really strong. So I would say Cypher is S tier overall. The last synergy we're going to be talking about here they got a buff is Street Demon. And what they did to it exactly is having 7 Street Demon is a little bit stronger, but they nerf having 10 Street Demon, which is pretty fair, because 10 Street Demon in general is just super strong. I don't think most things even beat it. I don't think even 10 Anima even beats it. So it makes sense to nerf 10, but buff 7, since most people don't play 7 right now, because you play 4 Techie with 5 Street Demons. So where would I put Vertical Street Demon? Probably like around an A tier. So it's like the same spot where it is currently. For the nerf side of synergies, they nerf Dynamo. And for whatever reason, I couldn't find it in the patch notes. I had to look through a Mortdog video for it. And in the patch, they're gonna nerf 2 Dynamos, which is kind of huge because this means that you cannot play Aurora as efficient enough as was before. So where does that put that on a tier list? As of right now, currently is B tier, and it'll still be B tier. Yes, it makes Aurora a little bit weaker to play her than like a +1 unit, but Aurora either way is still gonna be strong no matter what. So the synergy itself wouldn't really affect her too much. It just slows her down a little bit. And then the last synergy we're gonna talk about here is Golden Ox. And what they did to Golden Ox is having 6, they nerfed the damage by 5%, which is actually a lot, because I'm not gonna lie, every time I get Golden Ox emblem, I just force it, and most of the time I get top 4, since it'll allow you to gain almost an Affiliates 3 every game, since you're gonna get a lot of gold from it and a lot of resources. So this 5% damage makes it to where you can't play it to get your T top 4 anymore. You actually have to play it smart now. So where's I put that on a tier list? Before I would say it's S tier, but now maybe I'll bump it out to an A tier, because you can't just turn off your brain and just force it. You actually have to think about if you have to spend the money aggressively to gain more stacks for the extra amp damage that you need, or else you will just die fast. Now onto the units. For the 1 cost buff section, we got Alistair. And what they did to Alistair is they increased his damage reduction So this means that he's going to be even tankier than before. And he also does a lot of damage, like way more damage than before. So this might be worth it to 3-star him. Where would that put him on a tier list? Before, he would be A tier, but now because of the buffs, he'll be S tier, since he is the best budget tank and now possibly one of the best 3-star 1-cost tanks. So we got is Dr. Mundo. What they buff about him is they increase his AD by a lot on the ability and the damage of the ability by a little bit. So overall, this is actually really good. And they also buffed his healing. So where would that put him? Well, at the time, I would say like Alistair in A tier, but because of these buffs, I would say he's also S tier. It's pretty insane with these 1-cost tank buffs. They're probably super contested in the early game, so you can make it to level 8 with these 2 units. The next unit that they're buffing is a Kog'Maw, and they buffed his bonus ability damage of the AD by 10%, which is actually pretty huge. And what was that put him? Well, I say currently he is like a B tier, and I'll say he's probably like high B to low A tier, but just for the sake of saying that he got buffed, I'll say he's A tier then, because he could probably potentially tempo with these 2 bruisers, and you just have Kog'Maw Kindred. You can probably make it to fast A with these units. Next up is Morgana. Gave her a huge increase to her ability. Like overall from level 1, 2, and 3, it's a drastic amount of damage that she will get, and her ability lasts even longer than it was before. So that means that before she was like same thing like Kog'Maw, around a B tier. She was just a good item holder. But now you can potentially play her as a reroll unit as well. So that'll make her from, instead of an A tier, since the damage is insane and the duration of the ability is super long, she's like an S tier now, I would say. And I'll still say she was an S tier as an item holder. Last 1-cost unit we're going to be talking about here is Zyra. They increase her damage ability overall for all levels. And this is actually pretty good. Since her ability takes forever to hit, these damage buffs will help the initial hit to do at least something. As of right now, I would say she's B tier, and I'll still say she's B tier even after the buffs. I could be wrong, maybe she could be an A tier, or maybe even S tier. The way how I view her, I say she's B tier overall. There are no 2-cost buffs, so we'll go to the 2-cost nerfs, and we'll be talking about his Jhin. What they nerf on him is his initial mana, so meaning that he can't cast as fast on the first cast, and they also nerfed his ability damage by 10%. As of right now, he'd be put as an S tier, but because of these nerfs, maybe he'll be down to an A tier, since those little stats actually mean a lot for this unit. The next unit they nerf is Twisted Fate, and what they did is there's a huge nerf where he does 0.5 less AP on his stacks for his autos. For those of you that didn't know how TF worked, the reason why double Gwynsu's was very strong on him, because the more you auto attack, the more AP you stack. So this will delay his damage even more. But because they nerfed those stacks, they buff his base ability damage in general. So maybe I'll predict you need 1 Gwynsu's Rage Blade, a Jewel Gauntlet, and then a Gunblade. That might be useful. So for those nerfs, I would say he's from an S tier down to an A tier. Technically in the current meta, he'll be like A tier, so be A tier down to B tier. But as a unit in general, I like him as an S tier. So what do you say he's A tier after the nerfs? The last unit we're talking about here that they're gonna nerf for 2 costs is Vayne. And all they nerfed on her is her mana cost, which isn't really anything too crazy. So what would I put her in a tier list? Well, there's 2 different debates. People think it's her ability that makes her strong, but others, like I do, think that her auto attacks is melee thing that's making her strong. So therefore, I'll say she's from S tier to still S tier, since I think what makes Vayne strong is her auto attacks, not her ability. If it turns out she is weaker after live, we'll make an actual meta patch video later. As of right now, we're just doing this for predictions. I lied, I actually did not see this. Our final 2-cost unit is going to be Veigar nerfs. And again, for whatever reason, on the patch notes, it's not on there, so I have to look through a more dog video for it. And what they nerfed on him is all his ability damage per level. So that means that his power level is a lot weaker, so it creates him from being an S tier down to an A tier. Now on to the 3-cost units. For the buff section, we got is Braum, and what they buff on him is specifically the Kingpin hat, meaning if you put the hat on him. They buffed his armor and magic resist per level. So before it was a fixed number, but now if you have him level 3, it's double the amount. And what does that put him on a tier list? Well, he'll be an A tier, and I would say he'll still be A tier because in order for him to be super strong, you need him a level 3, and you need to have at least 5 Syndicate units on the board to activate the Kingpin hat on him. So you're not just going to use 3 Syndicate and put the hat on him, because you're going to do that for your damage carry. So therefore, I'll still say he's A tier. The next unit we're going to be talking about is Gragas, and what they buff on him is just his mana cost. So this means that he gets to cast his ability a lot more. What would that put him on a tier list? Well, currently he'll be B tier because he's great +1 unit, and he's great for his Divinity Corp synergy, giving more health to the board. So does that buff make him even better? Not really. He's just still the same overall. He's just there for his splash trait. So overall, he's still B tier. The next unit they buffed is Yuumi, and what they buff on her is her whole spell kit in general. They buff her whole ability on everything it does. So where does that put Yuumi? Well, I would say before she was like a C tier because no one wanted to use her, since for one, she doesn't fit in any comp. And 2, there was no reason to itemize her since she wasn't that useful. Unless you're playing for Annie, then you can use her as an Annie item holder and then just transfer items to Annie. But those buffs are actually pretty insane, so I'll say she's from C tier to at least an A tier, because that looks like it's going to be really good on her. For the 3 cost nerfs, we're going to be talking about is Jarvan. And what they nerf on Jarvan is his ability damage in general, since most of you that didn't know, if you just put 180 item on him, like IE, Sterax, or like Bloodthirster, he would just sweep his ability and just one-shot the whole board. So where does it put Jarvan? Well, he's an S tier before, and I'll still say he's technically S tier as a tank, so it didn't really change much. You just can't play him as a one-shot nuker. He's just there just to be an actual tank now, which is fine. So therefore, I'll say he's S tier. The last 3 cost unit that they nerf for like the 4th time is Rengar, and how they nerf him this time is they just decrease his HP. So as of right now, he's currently like an A tier, and I'll still say he's A tier. This unit is just too broken. I don't know what kind of nerfs they need to do to make him settle down a little bit, but for the most part, this unit is always relevant no matter what. That's it for the 3 cost units. Now we're going to talk about is the 4 cost unit, which is Aphelios. And what they buff on him is literally everything. So they buff his mana pool, so it's a lot faster to cast now. They buff a number of chakrams he can have, so that means each auto does a lot of damage. And the bonus 80 in general, meaning if you put more 80 on him, how much damage each chakram would do, they do even a lot more damage. So Aphelios before was like a B tier, but with these buffs, he's like an S tier. He's basically the new Zeri of this patch, which is, in all honesty, I feel like they should have done that at the beginning of the set, because we kind of needed another unit to compete against Zeri, since I was tired of the Exotech meta. But now it's like Exotech is probably dead, and it's just gonna be about Aphelios. So it's either one toxic comp or the other toxic comp. Basically saying, just get ready for Aphelios meta. The next 4 cost unit that are gonna buff is Cho'Gath, and what they buff on him is they made it to where he can cast a lot more, which is huge for this champion, because the more he casts, the tankier he gets. And they buff the AP ratio for the ability itself, which doesn't really matter too much since you're not gonna put Archangel stuff on him, unless that might be the new meta to do now. So where does that put Cho'Gath? In general, he's like an A tier tank, but most people just didn't want to use him because he didn't fit in any comps. But now, he's probably going to be played more, so he's going to go from an A tier tank to an S tier tank. The next 4 cost unit that they're going to buff is, I have no idea why they did it, is Vex. And I have to go through Mortdog's video to find it because they don't have an patch notes for some reason, again. And what they're going to buff on her is her overhealing conversion, meaning you have to have blue buff and gunblade for her to be super strong, and that extra healing is going to do a lot more damage. So what does that put her on a tier list? Well, currently she's in S tier, and she's just going to stay in S tier. Technically she'll be God tier at this point, right? But we'll just say S tier for now. The next 4 costs that they're going to be buffing is Xayah. And what they're buffing on Xayah is just her flat 80 stats. Not really anything too crazy. In general, Xayah's an A tier, and I'll still say she's an A tier even after the buffs. It doesn't really change much, to be honest. But the Anima Squad buff still with her though might be really crazy. That's it for the 4 cost units. Now we're going to talk about is the 5 cost units, and what they're going to buff is Urgot. In all honesty, he kind of needed it. So what they're buffing on him is just the flat 80 and his ability just by a little bit. Where does that put him on a tier list? Well, he goes from a C tier to, I would say, potentially a B tier. So he's actually more useful now. You combo him with Aurora still. He's still like one of the best +1s for Aurora. He'd be a lot better than he was before. So that's why I would say he's B tier. And then they buffed the hero augments. So the first one we'll be talking about here is Chuckbug. And Chuckbug is basically the Gragas hero augment. They buffed the passive damage through all levels, and they buffed the overkill spread by a lot as well. Currently, this augment is technically a D tier, meaning that you will never take it unless you want to play it for fun. But I'll say with these buffs, it'll probably go from a D tier to potentially high B to maybe A tier, but for the sake of I don't know if it is that strong, we'll just say it's B tier. The other hero augment that we see here they buffed is Button Mash, and Button Mash is the Poppy hero augment, and they buff her level 2 and her level 3 ability damage for the hero augment, and they also buffed the Cyber Boss version of her, the AoE, by like 5% more. Well, where would that put her? Currently she's B tier, but I'll say that buff will technically make her an A tier, so it'll be pretty good overall. For the 5 cost nerfs, which I forgot to talk about, which is Aurora, and what they nerf on her is her level 2 base damage of the ability is a lot, and even the AoE damage is also a huge nerf as well. So where would that put her? Well, currently she's an S tier, and I'll say because of the nerfs, since she can't technically delete anything anymore after those nerfs, she'll be from an S tier to an A tier, meaning she's actually going to be still useful no matter what. Even though they also nerf Dynamo for her, I still think she'll be a great unit overall, since you're throwing out technically a +2 unit playing Aurora. And the last 5 cost unit we're going to be talking about here that they nerf is Viego. And what they nerf on Viego is the heal of his ability by a lot, so he heals a lot less. They also nerf his base damage of the ability, which is kind of sad, since I feel like the damage is whatever already. And the splash damage is fair to nerf overall because he's an AoE unit. So I feel like the base damage should not be nerfed, and then they just nerf the healing and the splash, but they just nerf everything about him. So where does that put him in the tier list? Well, I would say he probably might be from an S tier to down to not even an A tier, probably a B tier. Yes, he's good because he technically a +2 unit on the board, but because they lower his damage and healing a lot, I feel like this is gonna be a huge impact on his value as a unit. So we'll just say he's B tier because I predict that he's not gonna be good anymore after these nerfs. The things that they adjusted is the Exotech synergy. Specifically that they adjusted is the item Cyber Coil. They buffed this armor and magic resist by like a lot. And I would say Cyber Coil is technically a D tier, but I'd probably bump it up to like a C tier. So it wouldn't really change much. In general, the value of the item is just whatever. But this is the main thing we want to hear, which is Flux Capacitor. They nerf the HP percentage you do to like a tanks, so it's a lot weaker against them. But they increased the attack speed a lot, which is actually pretty huge for Zeri. And the base damage overall is also increased by 5% more. So where would I put Flux Capacitor? Well, currently it's like around a B tier, but I would say it's like a high A tier to maybe even an S tier. It's hard to say, so I'll just say A tier to be safe. Now, the big item that we're going to be talking about here is Hollow Bow, and how they changed it is they increased the AP, so that's kind of good since it should be an AP item overall, but they nerfed the critical strike chance by 20%. This is pretty huge because this means if you put IE on it, you cannot gain critical strike chance to maybe 100%, so you can't get that critical strike damage bonus that you get from IE. So this is actually a pretty good nerf. And on top of that, in the early game is actually a huge nerf. The main reason why is because you can no longer gain mana back on the crit itself. So this means you have to build IE with Hollow Bow in the early game to gain a lot of mana for that unit. So this will slow down the early game a lot, and you can't win early game with just Jhin, with just Hollow Bow, which is a good nerf because a lot of people just win at the beginning of the lobby just having a Hollow Bow to start with. So where does that put Hollow Bow? Well, currently it's an S tier, but because of these nerfs, I would say potentially it could be A tier or even B tier. But just to stay safe, I'll say it's A tier. So it's hard to predict if Flux is going to be S tier, and it's hard to predict if Hollow Bow is going to be B tier overall, but we'll just say it's A tier for both, just to be on the safe side. The last thing we're going to talk about here is Kobuko, and they actually reworked the way how he works. So what all this basically says is he no longer gains mana, and he gains a lot of attack speed on his auto attacks. In order for him to go from phase 1 to phase 2, he has to lose about like 50% of his HP, and then he goes in his enraged mode, which is basically like the active of the previous ability. So if you want to do the knockup, he has to lose HP. And again, he doesn't have any more mana, so just throw him in the front and just make him lose HP so he could just like stun everything. Or you could play him as a backline unit with like Sniper's Focus or Rapid Fire Cannon and just let him all attack from across the map. That one's pretty good as well. So what does that rework put him at? Well, I feel like the value of that unit is actually really good. In general, he'll be like an A tier for what he does, but I would say the current meta is technically a B tier. I just say overall, in general as a unit, he'll be A tier, but either way, it'll be from whatever he's at to an S tier, since that rework is actually really good. To summarize all this, it's basically going to be a Philios meta with a super tank Cho'Gath, and Vex is still going to be pretty good, but not with Exotech. Maybe with Vex with like Cho'Gath might be good. Who knows? We just have to wait till the official patch comes out. But yeah, that is it for the patch 14.3 highlights. If you have any questions about anything about this, I'll try to answer the best of my capabilities. I don't know if I could give you guys the correct answer since the patch is not out yet, but if you just don't understand something, then I'll try to answer that. And then until I play the patch long enough, maybe about like 3 or 4 days, then I'll make an actual meta tier list. Maybe a week later, because like last patch, we didn't know that there's going to be like a Neferi or Exotech meta. So I might wait it out a little bit, or I could just make it 3 days later. Yeah, until then, I'll see you guys in the next one. Later.